Hello to you, my dear friends. As always, I hope you are doing very well. This is Adam here at The Fallback, and today we take a lecture on the commodification and value of music as it pertains to music in the digital era. So if you can, forgive the slightly facetious intro, this is in fact some very interesting stuff. And not only is it quite interesting, but it falls very close to the heart of some of the stuff I'm trying to talk about here on this channel. Mike actually did deliver a lecture of sorts to one of his old college classes pertaining to music and its value in the digital age and how it stacks up as an economic commodity, a whole bunch of stuff. It's a really great video, and I would recommend you watch the entire thing. For the sake of brevity, I'll try and isolate the specific points that I want to respond to and try to give them the proper context so it all makes sense in the confines of this video. But of course, like I said, make sure to watch Mike's full video back if you want to get the entire context of the conversation. And really quick, I'll mention that I in fact agree with the vast majority of what's in Mike's video. This isn't some contrarian or oppositional kind of stance I'm taking to what has been said, but I certainly think there's a few points worth picking up on and having a further discussion, because I think it's really important in terms of debate and education when it comes to music and the role it plays in the modern economy. But all that said, let's dive in. I'm sure you'll forgive the headphones as I listen back to the lecture and respond in kind.
No one cares about your music.
Thanks for the reminder, Mike. Great start to the lecture.
You need to give them a reason to care about it. Music in and of itself, especially digital music, does not have any economic value. I want you all to do this for me. I want you all to pick your favorite song right now. In your own head, pick your favorite song. Now, I want you to sit down and imagine you're listening to it through your earbuds. Do you owe royalties to the publisher, writer, or artist who made that song? You technically just played the song in your brain. You didn't have their permission.
I most definitely appreciate the thought experiment here and concede that, yeah, digital music and digital goods in general is a pretty major gray area. Of course, you don't owe any royalties to a song you've played in your head. Kind of in the same way you don't owe any royalties if you've purchased the album from the artist either. Basically, the transaction falls under IP law, and when you buy a record, you're essentially paying for the right to private consumption. And the same goes for other digital media, for example, Blu-ray discs or something like that. And there's all that stuff to do with redistribution of the work, which of course you can't do under normal circumstances, but that's possibly outside the confines of this conversation. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting thought experiment, but it's also not one that pertains exclusively to music. For example, if I pictured, say, the Coca-Cola logo in my brain, I'm not going to be owing Coca-Cola any royalties. Of course, if I try to display the Coca-Cola logo here or try to make some kind of commercial gain from it, then I'm going to be in some fairly serious trouble. And trademark laws and IP and all that sort of stuff is what covers it. And the same kind of goes for digital media like music as well. But we are trying to legalize and charge for a very abstract concept here, so I can see that it's incredibly hard to draw the lines.
If you receive the information of music, how would you apply that in order to get some utility out of it, in order to put a roof over your head, in order to find food, in order to breathe, in order to escape being killed?
It's an interesting point you raise here to try and apply music in a strictly utilitarian sense, which of course makes it appear to be an utterly useless piece of information. It's this big complex thing to do with, personal enrichment or, some kind of emotional or psychological benefit you gain from listening to certain music that moves you, so to speak. And you do touch on this later down the video as well. But yeah, if you stick music in an economic or utilitarian box, we're going to have a very hard time convincing people that they should pay for it.
Music in any practical general application does not really have any utilitarian economic value. So how do you sell something that doesn't really have any value? So one of the ways that we got around this was we put the idea to a physical medium, something tangible. It was a CD, it was a vinyl, it was a cassette, it was a show performed live. There was a limited control supply of something physical. It's scarce. So digital, it's as easy to reproduce as Control C, Control V. It's as easy to reproduce as drag and drop. The potential for supply is effectively infinite.
There's a few sections here that I think kind of tie together, at least in my head, to do with music's economic value as it pertains to its physical manifestation, I suppose. In the supply-demand economic concept, we are driving supply through the roof with digital music distribution, which of course heavily skews that supply-demand ratio. And this brought me to what I think is a very interesting thought, and I still don't quite know where I fall on it, but in my mind, there's another portion of this economic relationship, and that is the cost of manufacturing. So if we think about any physical good that we pay for with our money, let's say a car, we aren't just paying for the materials that went into forming and creating a functional car. Of course, the cost of materials bears into the final price that the consumer pays, but there's all that sort of behind the scenes stuff that weighs into the price as well. The cost of the workforce, the cost of the premises where the cars are manufactured, the cost of new or maintaining machinery needed to create the car, and on top of all that, the car company probably wants to try and make a bit of a profit as well. So it feels like there's this odd contradiction to me, wherein basically any other consumer space, we kind of implicitly understand the cost of manufacturing that goes into creating the good that we purchase. So when you go to buy a car, you don't expect to pay the, few $1,000s of metal, plastic, and rubber that went into making the car. You're aware that you're going to be paying a far higher price for all the effort and expertise that went into creating the car. So if we tag in a piece of digital music media for the car, in my head, I feel like there's still a cost of manufacturing that the consumer refuses to acknowledge. The time that the musicians invested into writing and recording the piece and the associated expertise there, the cost of production, whether they hired an engineer in a studio space or the cost of their own recording gear, the purchase and maintenance of any instruments, etc., etc. The list can go on. Now, as you mentioned, the digital age has driven down the cost of production, but in my mind, I feel like that cost still exists. So the idea that music carries no economic value until it's printed on some kind of physical platform just doesn't seem to quite stack up in my head. If we go back to that example of the car and we imagine the workforce behind it, the cost of all the machinery, etc., wasn't taken into account to the final price of the car, I'm sure we're going to find that that particular car manufacturer is going to be closing down very quickly if all they're charging for is the cost of materials. And another notion that kind of struck me is this idea of value only via physical media, because there are plenty of other, well, namely services that we pay for quite willingly that have no physical manifestation. Now, the best example I could come up with, and I admit it's kind of stilted, is that of, for example, a psychologist or counselor. Now, you can make the argument for the explicit nature of their expertise as it pertains to your life, but I don't want to go into all that sort of stuff. But we as consumers are more than willing to pay for services that have no inclination towards any sort of physical manifestation. We're paying for words that we hear and absorb and try to apply to our lives. So music being economically void of any value just doesn't seem to have a logical consistency to me. I fully realize that the general consumer does not care in the slightest for any of this logic, and the economy, I suppose, kind of speaks for itself. But nevertheless, I feel like it's a point worth exploring and maybe an opportunity for further education to the general consumer base. Good luck with that, I know, but let's try.
Lowered cost and lowered value of music makes it harder for an artist to negotiate for better royalties. For instance, Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift can ask for better royalties than, say, me, because there is extreme demand for her to be on the streaming platform. However, if you compare her royalties in streaming versus her royalties that she would have gotten, say, in the 80s if she had sold CDs or been on the radio, it's far less. And that is because of increased supply. The value that the streaming platform gives to the artist is extreme distribution. A distribution on a scale that is difficult to comprehend. These streaming platforms give the artist exposure.
Isn't there a little bit of a saying that goes something like exposure doesn't pay the rent? But in all seriousness, this Spotify thing is definitely an interesting beast, because you're totally right that Spotify increases distribution on an unprecedented scale, and the potential exposure is most certainly there. To that extent, I think Spotify is a positive thing, and in the full context of your lecture, I think the point that you draw towards is that you can utilize tools such as this to gain exposure for your music and then direct your consumers to other goods that you might be selling. I don't know if there are any facts and figures out there pertaining to Spotify's driving force in terms of sending a consumer from Spotify to another consumption platform where they can more directly support an artist. But to me, it feels like that link is relatively tenuous. I'm more than willing to be proven wrong here because I can only really speak from my own experience. In my view, Spotify seems to encourage this notion of music being nothing more than sort of background noise in a consumer's day, and I struggle to see that being a driving force into consumer being financially incentivized to directly support an artist. And while it's probably an ultimately fruitless endeavor, I do think there's value in trying to educate consumers on the real world costs to produce and distribute music.
Merch and shows provide something tangible. It provides more value to them than absorbing and interpreting the information of music in a single instance. It gives the consumer additional value rather than just paying the artist money in exchange for something that's inherently valued. This is where I say to artists, actually get creative. They need to start being creative. They get really creative when it comes to their music, not so creative when it comes to their business. Leverage and utilize your brand is the biggest missed opportunity of so many independent artists.
Now, at this point in the video, I'm probably sounding like a grumpy old man who just hasn't been able to crack the music business, and I'll confess that is kind of true. But I in fact 100% agree with this idea of musicians and artists trying to manifest as much value as possible to offer to their consumers. In Mike's own words, getting creative in other ways other than just the music itself to come up with other product that we can sell and find audiences is hugely valuable in the current artistic climate. I perhaps should have led the video with this because I in fact completely agree with this mode of operation, and in fact I'm creating this video in part because I agree with this mode of operation. Building yourself a brand and cultivating an audience as a result is almost immeasurably important, and there's no way that I can deny that. And that's a super important distinction that I want to draw here, because I am in no way advocating for some paradigm where an artist can simply sit down, make a record, and then wait around for the money to roll in. That's not how things should work in any respect. Absolutely, we need to work hard and sort of earn an audience that wants to support us and listen to our music. But I don't think that invalidates a cause where we go after these other economic imbalances in the music industry and try to educate consumers on the actual cost of the art that they so dearly hold on to.
Vinyl is really more of a novelty than anything else. It does provide a superior sound quality to MP3. Basically, my argument for the reason why CDs fell out and vinyl started increasing is because, you know, it was the artwork. I think it was really the artwork.
Really quick, I do want to talk about the whole vinyl thing because I myself am a vinyl collector. Ultimately, I think you are right that vinyl, or really any physical means of musical distribution, is ephemeral and the days are numbered in terms of how long such product will exist for. As you touch on, it is a scarce commodity in the current economy, but for me as a consumer who wants to support artists, it is one of the more direct ways in which I can do so at the moment. I want to invest in vinyl because I want to invest in the independent artists who are creating it. And yeah, I think vinyl does sound better, though to what extent I think is up for debate. What vinyl does for me, and I'm really worried this practice is going to get lost as vinyl disappears, is that it enforces a far more active listening experience. So I'll come home, I'll choose a record, put it on, and I'll be in the physical space where my record player is and pay very close attention to the music. I love it because it makes me actively engage in the listening experience, where I'm paying close attention to the lyrics if they're present and picking up on all the nuance that the musicians have instilled into their work. On a regular basis, of course, I'm like everyone else and have music on in the background while I'm working on something else, but I try to make it a regular habit of sitting down and really properly listening to a record. I think that's a diminishing practice, and that kind of scares me because that's going to just work further into the devaluation of music. So of course, it doesn't have to be vinyl, but I think it's at least keeping a portion of the market actively engaged in the listening experience. And if critical listening were a thing we could teach a majority of people, I don't think we'd end up really having any debate to do with the economic value of music. Mostly because pop would finally die.
How do we foster demand to closer meet supply? The best way to drive demand isn't through making things physical again. It's not through trying to drive vinyl. It's through education. That's a big part of what I do on my channel, is I educate people as to why they should care about music. I show my passion on my channel. So why should people care about music? I can't name the number of albums that have gotten me through depressing times. Very much so. I don't think it'd be too much to say that music has saved my life.
The efforts that you put into education on your channel, Mike, certainly don't go unnoticed, at least by me. So very quickly, I thank you sincerely for what you do. And ultimately, this is where I'm at as well. I really do wish as many people as possible to see the value in music. There is the economic component that we talk about a lot and is to an extent valuable, but as you're touching on towards the end of your video, there is a far more important value to music that I think is getting lost. I think it's really easy to forget that by and large, a lot of us probably have a song or a record or many records that have moved us in some way and probably had a long-term or macro effect on our lives. And that value is so easily lost, and that's why it is so important to try and remind everyone that music is a really cool thing. And if we can figure that part out and get everyone away from recycled pop trash and into more meaningful music, then the economic component should take care of itself. As you've essentially said through the course of this lecture, if you can emotionally move a consumer with your work, then they are likely going to be financially motivated to try and support you. And that is about all I have. Mike, if you do end up watching this all the way through, I sincerely thank you both for doing that and for the video that you put out. As mentioned, I think by and large we agree on basically everything around this particular topic, but there are a few interesting things that I just wanted to pick up on and I think are worth discussing a little bit further. But of course, as with all things, this should be an open discussion, so to any other viewers, make sure to get down in the comments below and let us know what you think. If you are otherwise emotionally moved by the subject matter of this video, I hope you are incentivized to either hit that like or subscribe button, and I hope to see you again in the next video. Catch you later.